Hello and a very warm welcome. Thanks for tuning in to News 9 Live. I'm Kabir Naqvi. You're watching this special broadcast from our studios here in the National Capital Region. An expansive list of, blockbuster stories that we're going to bring to you. Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Narendra Modi's first bilateral for the first time in the last 5 years. But before that, the top headlines we're tracking for you at the top of this newsfeed. Well, first up, Prime Minister Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping hold bilateral meeting. Prime Minister Modi says India-China relationship is crucial for world peace. Prime Minister Modi at the 16th BRICS Summit says there is no place for double standards on terrorism and terror financing. BRICS Summit, in its declaration, calls for immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Political developments back at home. Priyanka Gandhi Vadra makes her electoral debut, files nomination from Wayanad for the Lok Sabha bypoll. Cyclone Dana alert on India's east coast. Odisha begins evacuation of 1 million people, shuts schools for almost 3 days. Andhra Pradesh Chief Minister Chandrababu Naidu announces Deepam scheme to give free gas cylinders to eligible women. The Bengaluru building collapse. Owner's son and the contractor have been arrested in the Bengaluru building collapse case. 8 people have been killed in the incident. India-China diplomatic standoff. The Justin Trudeau-led government leaked sensitive information on India to the Washington Post, days ahead of Canadian police briefing on the Hardeep Singh Nijjar case, say reports. But ladies and gentlemen, our focus this special broadcast, because tonight we break down the high-stakes bilateral and the talks between Chinese President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. This is not about the personal chemistry between these two leaders, but the result of intense backroom negotiations led by key officials from both the sides, culminating in the face-to-face meeting on the diplomatic table after 5 long years. From Prime Minister Modi's visit to Wuhan to Xi Jinping's Gujarat visit, their interactions in Indonesia, this meeting that you're seeing on your screens represents the culmination of months of dialogues involving Ajit Doval, Bangi, and External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar. Let's circle back to the meeting at hand. Listen in to what Prime Minister Modi had to say, what Chinese President Xi Jinping had to say.
आपसे मिलकर खुशी है और जैसा आपने कहा 5 साल के बाद हमारी फॉर्मल मीटिंग हो रही है। हमारा मानना है कि भारत और चीन के संबंधों का महत्व केवल हमारे लोगों के लिए ही नहीं, लेकिन वैश्विक शांति, स्थिरता और प्रगति के लिए भी हमारे संबंध बहुत अहम है। एक्सेलेंसी, सीमा पार पिछले 4 वर्षों में उत्पन्न हुए मुद्दों पर बनी सहमति का हम स्वागत करते हैं। सीमा पर शांति और स्थिरता बनाए रखना हमारी प्राथमिकता रहनी चाहिए। म्यूचुअल ट्रस्ट, म्यूचुअल रिस्पेक्ट और म्यूचुअल सेंसिटिविटी हमारे संबंधों का आधार बने रहना चाहिए। आज इन सभी विषयों पर बात करने का अवसर मिला है। मुझे विश्वास है कि हम खुले मन से बातचीत करेंगे और हमारी चर्चा कंस्ट्रक्टिव होगी।
Mr. Prime Minister, it's my great pleasure to meet you in Kazan. It's the first time for us to have a formal meeting in 5 years' time. Both the people in our two countries and the international community are paying great attention to our meeting.
分歧，相互成就，
China and India are both ancient civilizations, major developing countries, and important members of the Global South. We are both at a crucial phase in our respective modernization endeavors. It best serves the fundamental interests of our two countries and two peoples, for both sides to keep to the trend of history and the right direction of our bilateral relations. It's important for both sides to have more communication and cooperation, properly handle our differences and disagreements, and to facilitate each other's pursuit of development aspirations. It's also important for both sides to shoulder our international responsibility, set an example for boosting the strength and unity of the developing countries, and to contribute to promoting multipolarization and democracy in international relations.
我愿同总理先生就两国关系和共同关心的问题交换意见。
Mr. Prime Minister, I'm prepared to exchange views with Your Excellency on our bilateral relationship and issues of mutual interest.
Well, so President Xi Jinping saying that we must properly handle our differences. It's a multipolar world, and democracy and multipolarity is the way to go. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Modi saying that border disengagement is welcome, peace and stability, mutual trust, respect and sensitivity should be the foundation of our two countries. But the BRICS Summit also provides a crucial backdrop now, doesn't it? With China now being the biggest trade power at the table, it's significantly and politically important for India. But let's not forget the strained relations post-Galwan 2020. Joint patrolling and recent disengagement along the LAC may have set the stage for these talks, but critical questions remain unanswered. Why did Galwan happen? And what do joint patrolling operations look like moving forward? We'll also explore China's historic tendency to take one step forward, two steps back, and whether India can and China can truly coexist as leaders in a new global world. Joining us on the broadcast to speak more on this, Manish Chand, senior journalist, foreign affairs expert, live with us from Kazan in Russia. Also with us on the broadcast, Ambassador Jayant Das Gupta, former ambassador to the WTO. You've got Pramit Pal Chaudhary, foreign affairs expert, with us on the broadcast. Always a pleasure to be speaking with you. And Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, defense and geopolitical expert, with us on the broadcast as well. A very warm welcome to you, General. First and foremost, to the ambassador with us on the broadcast. Ambassador Das Gupta, first to you. You know, like Xi Jinping himself said, the entire world is keeping a close eye on these two ancient civilizations and growing modern democracies that are now sitting on the table across from each other. We're looking at properly handling our differences, more communication. But this one question that was put to Vikram Misri as well, I'll put it to you, sir. Can China be trusted?
Well, the very short answer to that is it can't be. Because China, you know, it may be talking of peace, it may be talking of joint patrolling, etc. But it has massively upgraded its infrastructure all along our Ladakh border and Arunachal border. And, you know, they have built bridges around on the Pangong Tso lake. They have built underground hangars. They have built massive roads to carry their armor, their tanks, and they are preparing. So I think it's a very welcome step that the two countries have at least resolved their differences for the time being, that there will be joint patrolling, but we can't let our guard down even for 1 second. We have to be prepared for the worst. And mind you, just to remind our viewers, China has border disputes, whether they are on land or on sea, with at least 12 of its neighbors. And I think barring Russia, it has problems with everyone.
Many thanks for your opening comments. General Kulkarni, coming to you next. I remember Vikram Misri deferred the same military question to the military leadership here back at home. He did not want to answer it particularly, but disengagement, would it essentially mean that we've got soldiers lined up there on those friction points for another 5th year?
Well, Kabir, you know, these are all the modalities that will be seen on ground, how it is to be translated. But I have no doubt that it would be done. With you know, the steps will be taken, ensure that there are no tensions along the LAC. And what I could you know, make out even when both the leaders are talking, definitely gives a bit of confidence that genuinely, if where there's a will, there's a way, and if there is an agreement at the highest level that things have to be translated on ground, things will be translated on ground. There is no denying the fact, because everybody follows, and once the rules are clear, and if the Chinese has the desire, their wish to be going along the way for peace and tranquility along the LAC, because that was the basic requirement of ours before anything could happen for good relations between the two countries. And that itself is being seen. So I see something very positive. I look at it very, very, in a manner that winters are setting in. There'll be less tension on the ground. And whichever way, where the troops are pulling back, and going back or resting somewhere, well, those are all modalities that will take place. And I hope, and I sincerely hope that on ground, things are not, we don't get involved in small things, because we must look at it that we have to first and foremost restore, status quo ante May 2020. That is the first thing. And I find it definitely achievable, absolutely achievable, because since I was in uniform not many years back, I know exactly. Absolutely achievable. There is nothing that can't be done as regards May 2020 is concerned. And I'm quite positive things will be transparent. It's time both the countries will show maturity with mutual respect, as the Prime Minister said, and mutual sensitivity, and things will be translated on ground.
All right, so positive signs, at least that's what the defense expert on the panel has to say. But, Pramit Pal Chaudhary, foreign affairs expert with us on the broadcast. Pramit, let's circle back to how this meeting got, on the cards. We've seen Doval speaking to Wang Yi. External Affairs Jay Shankar the minister has categorically said that 75% disengagement has happened. I mean, this is not necessarily about the chemistry of these two leaders, because we've seen what happened in Gujarat. We've seen what happened in Wuhan. The two leaders also met in South Africa, if I'm not wrong, in Bali, in Indonesia as well. But I think it's the hectic parlaying, of the bureaucrats, all the engagement that happened behind closed doors. How did this meeting land up on the cards?
So as far as I understand it, the negotiations have been going on almost for 20 months now. And really it was roughly at the beginning of this year, that we started to see the Chinese signal that they were prepared to they wanted to, as I said, normalize the relationship. India had repeatedly said any normalization obviously will require you to walk back on the border and restore the status quo ante of before Galwan. And the Chinese began to indicate that they were prepared to do so. I think by about April, two places the Chinese had walked back, but it indicated that they needed a further commitment from India on normalization, and this incorporated things like the resumption of commercial flights between the two countries, and easing of visa restrictions, and potentially some dilution of the barriers India has placed to Chinese investment in the country. We saw Modi, for example, Prime Minister Modi make an interview in Newsweek at about this point, indicating that he was prepared to do so. And then we saw this slowly work its way through. And as you mentioned, Jai Shankar, Wang Yi met repeatedly. Modi and Xi had brief encounters at a number of multilateral summits, but these were not structured meetings, literally just handshakes and photo ops. And so eventually the BRICS Summit was both sides were looking at the BRICS Summit as being the obvious point in which they could sort of cap all of this done, and that's actually happened. The last stage was not so much the 4 points in the border, the PPT and Pangong areas, which had already been conceded by the Chinese by about August. It was Demchok and Debsung, the restoration of patrolling rights, which the Chinese said had anyway been blocked even before Galwan, so shouldn't be on the table. But in the end, I would argue India refused to back down on this, and eventually the Chinese blinked. So now we've seen that come together with the summit, the first structured bilateral meeting between the two leaders in 5 years.
And I think it seems like India has extended that olive branch as well, giving full support to the SCO presidency by China next year. But coming back to Ambassador Dasgupta, who's with us on the broadcast, Ambassador, we also have to take a look at why this is politically important for India, because BRICS, a grouping that began with Russia, now has China sitting at sitting really tall on the table. On that front, essentially, how can India balance its own national ambitions, given the fact that China, the tall dragon, is sitting there on the table as well?
Well, I think, there is this perception that BRICS is basically anti-West. And India has been trying to dispel this notion that it is not about being anti-West. It is non-West. It is basically about the global South, with Russia being there as well. And the agenda is to have greater inclusivity and greater say. And Prime Minister Modi also in today's interaction with the press, I think he has mentioned about the UN Security Council, about the multilateral development banks like the IMF and the World Bank, and the WTO, amongst other organizations, which need greater inclusivity and which need to be democratized and reformed. Reform is the word for it. So that is the basic purpose for which BRICS was formed initially. And to a certain extent, I think there has been some reform in the MDB share, voting pattern, voting shares, etc. But a lot more needs to be done. And then the new development bank, which was set up in 2014 in Shanghai, that also has posed a challenge in a sense to the World Bank in terms of funding for infrastructure projects, mainly in the global South. And so I think all in all, and now the focus that Prime Minister Modi has been trying to give to BRICS is about digital infrastructure sharing, about the unified payments interface, and about climate change, and how the global South needs to step up and tackle this challenge in a collective way.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. Pramit Pal, take a look at this. Important, interesting points that, the ambassador has raised. Not anti-West, but non-West. Global South is a word that was coined during the G20, the voice of the Global South, that has again been used by President Xi Jinping as well. It's sort of like a situation where India goes onto the table and say, look, you want to be number 2, you want to be number 3, be number 2 or number 3 with us in this grouping over here. A different world order, our own world order. Are we looking at this significant paradigm shift?
But keep in mind that the Chinese and Russians do not believe in this idea of a non-West. They want this to be an anti-Western organization. And if anybody is familiar with the internal negotiations within the BRICS, India, Brazil, and South Africa have clashed repeatedly with Russia and China on this issue, that this is not about being anti-Western. It is about being, as the ambassador said, non-Western. But this is not the stance of Russia and China. So the BRICS has a long way to go, and as its membership expands, we'll have to see what direction it goes. But keep this in mind that internally, the BRICS is very severely divided on this issue. And one of the reasons that India has supported certain countries' membership is because they feel that those countries will be aligned, should we say, with this idea of BRICS being non-Western, but not anti-Western.
All right, pertinent points. General Kulkarni, coming back to you, because we were talking about disengagement, and you were, positive about that, the achievability of the same. But, a lot of my peers, close peers, they don't really understand what joint patrolling essentially is. Is it going to be half side India, half side China? Is it going to be one after the other? Because people still to date can't really pinpoint and put a finger on the fact why Galwan clashes actually did happen. Was it national ambitions that really led to that skirmish? But again, coming back to the joint patrolling, how does that, what entails joint patrolling? How does that, pan out?
Well, I haven't seen exactly what the statement is. Was it a statement stating that it will be joint patrolling, or is it a patrolling where, each one of them in a month would be able to do it twice over and on dates which they'll be informing one another? and the patrolling points would be passed to and seen through by both the patrols. I think that is one way of doing it. The second, as you said, joint patrolling, well, both the patrols decide to be there on a specific date and time, and then go along the patrol points that are there. So you are virtually walking together. It could be very close to each other. Well, those are modalities that can be seen. That means both the parties are there at the same time and walking across and passing through all the patrol points, be 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, depending on that particular day, because those 74 patrolling points can't possibly be done in one day. So different points, different this thing, to ensure that, well, all those patrolling points, none of them are being transgressed. They exist that, and that is where the things are. Basically, it is to ensure that there is no trust deficit, and that both sides understand each other. Both sides are, aware of the peace and tranquility that has to be ensured along the LAC. So that those are modalities that can be worked out. It's not difficult at all. And Kabir, let me tell you again and again, even if it meant repetition, to go back to May 2020 is not at all difficult. It was there for all the years. So I don't see any difficulty. I think that's something which was easily achievable and easily doable. And both sides, I'm sure, would be more than happy to do it. And on numerous times that we've done it, and if I have done it also a part of it, it's so much good that we exchange maybe a cup of tea or even a glass of water being handed over, even a packet of biscuits to each other. So it's very nice. I think if there is no tension and if there is peace and tranquility, it definitely works in the interest of both the countries.
No tension. Is there no tension? I mean, you've been speaking to News9 for the longest time. We've done documentaries called The Galwan Trigger, The Hut Pursuit, talking about how military settlements have come up. We're not looking at three different sectors anymore. It's one unified command right in the top, 50 kilometers from the edge point. We can now see a hut, a military, base that's come up with China. I mean, all of these escalations, do you think the optics of both the leaders sitting across the table and the words that they've uttered about peace, tranquility, is it really going to, play out on the ground?
Kabir, where there's a will, there's a way, number one. Number two, capacity building takes time. Intentions can change overnight. And to keep that as the backdrop, constant preparation, you have to be prepared at all times. And the more the preparation, lesser the chances of it going wrong. That itself acts as the deterrence. And when you know that we are neighbors, we aren't just friends, we are neighbors. And neighbors will remain neighbors. Friendships, you can change your friends, but you can't change your neighbors. And so much better that both the countries work together. And the LAC is the most sensitive issue. You saw in the Prime Minister's little talk, most of it revolved around what things went wrong along the LAC, and there's a lot of hope that things will be set right, but a lot of hope that mutual sensitivity, mutual respect, mutual trust, all of it being said, it is a question of wanting to execute now. Execution is something which I'm positive if both the countries, and I again repeat, both the countries, and the word that one uses, ancient civilization. I still remember when I was at Bumla, I had made a board over there and we had just started to do the BPMs over there. And we used to write over there, both the countries are ancient civilizations and both must learn. And this I'm talking about is 20 years back. So something which is doable. I have a firm opinion that there is nothing, especially on ground, there is nothing that can't be done. Everything can be done. And especially both are soldiers and both understand what it means to face minus 35 degrees, what it means to face wind at 100 kilometers an hour, what it means to have a whiteout condition. Everybody understands. It's nothing that nobody understands. And therefore, if they have constructed what they've constructed, well, they've done the capacity building. And therefore, we also need to constantly be on the guard. We also need to build our own capacity. And therefore, once everything is there, that itself acts as a deterrence. And once there's a development, mutual, dependency on so many issues, especially trade, rare earth materials, so many things that both the countries would be dependent, the world would be dependent on each other. You'll find that if almost 45% of the world's population is BRICS, just with the kind of strength that we have, if 30 more countries are to join, it may probably become 75% of the world population, with almost over 48% of the crude production that is there. 30% of the world's GDP, more countries joining, it would virtually be 50-50 because if $30 trillion is that what of the BRICS is, and if it's $40 trillion is what the G7 is, you find, and rightly said by the ambassador, we are not anti-West. No grouping is anti, it's non-West. That means this itself is a deterrence. When you have two groupings with equal strengths and equal capacities, equal capabilities, ability to respect each other, obviously you have respect for one another when you are talking eye to eye, walking shoulder to shoulder, you're doing things together. Each one of them have their own characteristics, own strong points, own weaknesses. One looks at not wanting to move along with a hidden agenda. I'm sure everybody understands everything. And when you have strength, you and everybody, especially China. China respects strength, and all countries respect strength. And when we are growing technologically, we are growing militarily, we are growing diplomatically, we are growing economically. All of it is increasing our comprehensive national power. And we find that we are there and we have arrived. In another 5 years, we'll be the third largest economy. And we have to do it. External and internal. Internal also is very important because all other countries are very, authoritarian and things of those kinds. And we are a democracy where lots of
there are unexplained issues as well, General. There are unexplained issues as well. You're right on the capacity building front, but then again, with India and China, we've seen it time and again, it becomes a prestige issue. Just a short while ago, we showed you those visuals as the Prime Minister emplaned for India. He's traveled back to India. We got those visuals just a short while ago. We're going to have to slip into a quick commercial break here. Gentlemen, do stay on with us. Several aspects still yet to talk about, unexplained issues, and what about the lessons that we've learned from history? We'll talk all about that on the other side. Keep it with Newsline Live.
Hey, why are so many lights on? Is it Navroz?
Settling accounts, uncle?
No, writing a love letter. Check your accounts every day and ensure there is no mismatch. Exchange sends trade-related messages daily. Do timely verification. And if there is a mismatch, inform the exchange immediately.
सोच कर, समझ कर, invest कर.
Why is the state not looking at putting an embargo on that?
As a Telangana person, I will not accept.
How do ordinary folks deal with this?
Welcome back. You're watching News 9 Live. We're here decoding the big bilateral that took place between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Xi Jinping. For the first time in the last 5 years, post the Galwan clash of 2020, both the leaders sat across from each other talking about multipolarity and democracy. Breaking those layers one by one. Manish Chand, senior journalist and foreign affairs expert, live with us from Kazan in Russia. Quickly to you, Manish. Manish, first and foremost, the Chinese president, he himself said the entire world had their eyes glued on to this bilateral. What was it like there in Kazan? Were you all waiting for this bilateral to take place as well? What were you expecting and hoping, and what finally came out of it?
Right. So I think the big story really from Kazan, which has overshadowed the BRICS Summit in a way, at least from India's point of view, is this bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping. The first meeting since the Galwan crisis, and now this meeting marks the talks that happened today, marks a new beginning in India-China relations. I think the messaging was very clear. I think the ground was prepared by, Foreign Secretary who announced that the patrolling arrangement deal has been done, and disengagement of troops from the remaining friction points in Depsang and Demchok. All that has been done. And now we know that this is not just a spin, but this has been affirmed at the highest level by both leaders. So it's a huge development. What it means is that this also marks the revival of the dialogue process, which is frozen after the Galwan conflict. Now, what the revival of the dialogue process means is that, before the Galwan thing, India and China used to have at least 20 bilateral dialogue mechanisms, and they're completely frozen. So now they have prepared a sort of roadmap. Now, among the important highlights of the roadmap that has been agreed upon by the two leaders, number one is, of course, maintenance of peace and tranquility on the border will top the agenda. And for this, the two leaders instructed special representatives of the two sides who are in charge of the boundary question to meet as early as possible and focus on taking a long strategic view and resolve the boundary issue. So this is a very big thing, that confidence building measures there will be to ensure that the agreement arrived at today will be honored in word as well as deed. The second thing is that other dialogue mechanisms will also be revived. For now, we know that the dialogue mechanism between the foreign ministers of the two countries will be revived, and the two leaders have instructed meeting the two foreign ministers to meet as well in the near future. And although this has not been spelled out in fine print, but I assume that there will also be dedicated dialogue on economic issues. India-China trade has grown manifold despite the ban on Chinese apps and all that happened. Those punitive steps India took after the Galwan clashes. But now they will be focusing on, so the trade has grown to all-time high of $125 billion plus, but the trade deficit has grown to more than $100 billion. So I think this has been also one of the this will be one of the major highlights in the coming days, that how the trade deficit will be reduced, border peace will be restored and sustained. What is more important is, and the question a lot of people are asking is that whether this deal will be honored or not. Now, when you're talking about atmospherics in Kazan, it's not just India which is talking about this meeting. I mean, I'm here at the BRICS Media Center, and there are at least more than 1,000 journalists. And a lot of people have come asking me about this. Then everybody seems to be talking about it. So in a way, it has overshadowed. And why? And as you rightly said, that Xi Jinping said, and Prime Minister, that the good relations between India and China, positive, constructive relations, are necessary for regional peace and stability, global peace and stability. When two large economies, China is $15 trillion economy roughly. India is $4 trillion economy, and very soon will be third largest economy. So there are two neighbors, and most important, these are two neighboring countries. So they need to find a modus vivendi
Manish,
to coexist.
a little bit about their statements as well in that bilateral. You know, Xi Jinping had to say that we need to properly handle our differences. You rightly pointed out we have special representatives. Border talks are going to top the agenda. Multipolarity and democracy. We know multipolarity was also theme of the summit. But the word democracy being uttered by somebody like Xi Jinping, who's time and again hinted at, those grand halls back at home in China, in Beijing, that, it's the party that takes the center stand, not democracy.
No, so you see, they have, Chinese have a phrase called socialism with Chinese characteristics and democracy. So, similarly, it is democracy with Chinese characteristics. Probably what is alluding to is that we think that China's Communist Party of China is one large monolith, but it's also the largest political party, so to speak. So they have internal democracy. As in, I'm talking about the Chinese version, but this is a very interesting formulation that Chinese president is talking about democracy. But they clearly believe that they have, in fact, a more effective democracy than many other countries, so-called Western democracies. So
I took the same question to Ambassador, Das Gupta, General Kulkarni, Pramit Pal, foreign affairs expert, also with us on the broadcast. But, Manish, the same thing, that is there a paradigm shift in terms of, for example, the word global south being uttered time and again at the BRICS Summit, a proper paradigm shift of a new world order. I remember Ambassador Das Gupta saying it's not anti-West, it's just non-West.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the whole idea. So this is, in a way, the BRICS Summit in Kazan, and together with the G20 Summit in New Delhi last year, herald the beginning or mark the consolidation of the global South as a powerful force in global politics. It is about resetting the global order. You see, BRICS originally started as a counterpoint to Western narrative and West-dominated institutions. But there are countries, and we know who I'm talking about, who would like this to convert into an anti-West alliance. But there is a sobering realization that to be more effective and to have broader legitimacy and acceptability, this can be a non-Western alliance, non-Western grouping, and not anti-West grouping. So you have this huge representation. I'm really amazed. For example, the hotel where I'm staying in, they have a huge Venezuelan delegation. There are countries which are itching. So BRICS is the most coveted club for developing countries, emerging economies, and the list is already being announced or worked out. But you have countries from Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America, and there are many more in the queue. So what you have created is a coalition of global South. On a cynical label, some would say that President Putin is leveraging or using BRICS as a show of strength, to tell the West that...
But Manish, he very well could be. He very well could be. In the declaration as well, it talks about negative implications of the global sanctions as well. I'm going to quickly take this question to Pramit Pal, who's with us on the broadcast. Manish, do stay on with us. Pramit, from where Manish left us, is BRICS increasingly becoming a platform for China to counter the Western influence? Could one say that?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons for the expansion. China was obviously the most powerful member of the BRICS. It's bigger than all the other original 4 members in economic size. And in many ways, it is the country that has been most enthusiastic about the BRICS over the past 10 years. I've attended a number of BRICS summits myself, and much of it was about trying to keep China from taking over the agenda. But by expanding the BRICS, part of the game, I think, but for countries like India and Brazil who are wary of Chinese domination, is to reduce China's influence or dilute China's dominance of the BRICS internally. So you bring in a country like the United Arab Emirates, a country like Saudi Arabia, or Egypt, all of whom are Western allies and who may have their own independent view regarding the global South and on foreign policy issues vis-a-vis the West, but are not interested in getting into a squabble or try to destroy the Western international order, or more moderate, if you wish. And I think that is a policy that will continue, and that will not change. But the BRICS will take some time to find a common path, or a third path, if you wish, between China's extreme anti-Western stance and some of the more less clear visions of some of the other smaller countries. And that's where India will be crucial, because we are both a founding member and our global south path is now, should we say, or influence is now increasingly evident, partly because of our economic clout, because of our own diplomatic successes, especially in the past 10 to 15 years, and the fact that we are now offering public goods to developing countries, things like our digital public infrastructure initiative, things like the Aadhaar biometric system, which is now being looked at by several countries around the world. Brazil recently launched an equivalent of a digital payment system and described it officially as UPI inspired. That's the kind of thing India is working on, and showing that we can provide answers to global south problems. And do so in a manner that is not as intrusive or dominating as the way that, let's say, what China does.
All right. Ambassador Das Gupta, we're talking about trade, politics, a new world order, Wuhan to Gujarat to Indonesia, but we've taken some big steps as well. What's the way ahead? What's the lasting roadmap for better friendship between these two nations? People still till date talk about the 62 war. People still talk about the 2020 clash, and not much weightage in terms of where they base their logic at. There are unspecified issues. There's a trust deficit. But then again, two leaders sitting across the table. Where do you think this is going?
I think you have to take a longer term view and step back a little and look at what China aspires to become in the next 10 years or so. And of course, it can talk about multipolarity in the BRICS context, but China is very firmly of the view that it should be the middle kingdom, as it mentions, and all other countries should, be around it, and it should be the central kingdom. Now, with that in mind, and China, of course, has been not, very reluctant to flex its muscles also in its neighborhood. That is the second point. The third point is about economic domination through the Belt and Road Initiative. And if you look at the Chinese mindset, the press note 3, through which we said that FDI from neighboring countries, including mainly China, if it were to be proposed for India, they would need stricter scrutiny. And then we stopped bilateral flights, and when we also had issues about stricter controls on visas for Chinese technicians, engineers, and industrialists. So all this has affected China, and China is looking to expand its markets. And BRI has perhaps reached a kind of a plateau, because there are problems which countries are facing because of the debt trap that many of them have got into. And they don't have the capacity to repay the Chinese loans for all the huge infrastructure projects that they agreed to let China build on their lands. Now, having said that, it is very difficult for China to ignore India for its vast market potential. And investments is one area where China would dearly love to come in and, carry on as if things like Galwan had not happened. But that is where I think the nub lies. We can't let things go back to normal, or, back to what they were before Galwan, because of what the Chinese have done. And the second thing is that if you look at bilateral trade, China has been, a master at using non-tariff barriers of various kinds. They have used it against India. So our exports to China have stagnated at the $16 billion to $18 billion levels for the past few years. Chinese exports to India have rocketed to about $100 billion or more now. And that is another thing which India has been raising. And in the last week in the WTO, when there is a trade policy review, of every country held periodically, India raised all these issues against China. So the basic problem is that China would like to export as much as possible, not allow imports to take place unless you listen to them, or may allow your imports to come in to a certain extent only. And they did it with the Australians as well. They stopped the shipments of wine, of meat, of various other products of Australia. And despite their having an FTA, they behaved in a very irrational manner and WTO incompatible manner with Australia. So the Chinese, the short point is, we have many issues with China and we have to keep trying to resolve them. But China keeps all the cards close to its chest and shows a card and a little, this is very welcome, the joint patrolling thing, because it reduces the tension and it helps in the process of normalization. But there are so many other issues that we need to resolve with China that we should not be...
One round at a time, I think, Ambassador. That's what Xi Jinping also tried to say at that bilateral. One step, one punch, one round at a time. Properly resolve our differences. Manish Chand, we're running out of time. I'm going to quickly cut across to senior journalist, foreign affairs expert, live with us from Kazan, Russia. Manish Chand, even as we're looking at these visuals as the Prime Minister in planes for the national capital, the social media is flooded with pictures of Putin, Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi saying India, Russia and China, the new world equation, greater than and better than the rest of the world.
Right. I think this is something, and I think this is another major takeaway from here. President Putin and even Chinese president, they're trying to revive what is called RIC, Russia, India, China, trilateral. The Galwan conflict and strained relations with India were coming in between India, China. But now with this, you have the three major countries from the non-West bloc grouping getting together in a way for their, of course, their own interest. And in the BRICS, and another important story is that there was a remarkable convergence on new members and new partner countries. So finally, with India-China tensions easing, the stage has been cleared. Stage is set for a closer relations between these three countries. How it will play out, we don't know. So when we are talking about multipolarity, this is the kind of multipolarity Putin talks about, and it's a big gain for him because so far, and in fact, another story emanating from Kazan is that President Putin played a pivotal behind-the-scenes role in promoting or in facilitating this thaw in India-China relations, this meeting.
All right.
So, yeah.
All right. And that's great information that you've put for our viewers there, Manish. President Putin's role. Well, we'll have to wait to, decode that particular aspect. But on that note, I'll have to thank all the gentlemen that have joined us on this broadcast. Manish Chand, many thanks for joining us live from Kazan, Russia. Ambassador Jayant Dasgupta, always a pleasure to speak to you. Pramit Pal Chaudhary, many thanks for joining with us. And General Kulkarni, always a pleasure to listen to your insightful insights. Expansion, ambitions, resolution, a declaration, and of course, resolving of disputes. That's what BRICS had in store for us. But what next for India-China thought? That's the first time I've used this word. Wanted to wait for the bilateral to actually take place. Slipping into a quick commercial break here. Top developments will continue on the other side. Keep watching News 9 Live.